Dive into the gripping story of Eleanor, a chief judge torn between her professional duty and her deep love for her brother. Watch as she faces an impossible choice: uphold the law or risk everything to help her brother achieve parole and restore their family's honor. This emotional drama explores themes of justice, loyalty, sacrifice, and redemption. Will Eleanor's courage and determination be enough to overcome the odds? Don't miss this heart-stopping tale of family bonds and moral dilemmas. The searing midday sun beat down on Marcus, a suffocating blanket of heat that matched the knot in his stomach. He leaned against the graffiti-covered wall of the community center on Elm Street, the distant wail of sirens a constant backdrop to the city's hum. Just moments ago, he'd seen a blur of movement, a figure in a dark hoodie darting from the corner store, the jingle of the alarm still echoing in the humid air. Then came Officer Miller, his squad car screeching to a halt, tires kissing the curb. Miller, a familiar, unwelcome presence in this neighborhood, had a history of cleaning up the streets by targeting young black men. Hands up. Now. Miller barked, his voice cutting through the urban din, his hand already on his service weapon. Marcus, startled, slowly raised his hands, the faint scent of stale beer and exhaust fumes filling his nostrils. It was a fatal instinct. Miller, seeing a easy collar, twisted the scene, conjuring an image of Marcus as the fleeing culprit, his every move deemed suspicious and aggressive in Miller's prejudiced mind. Across town, in the hushed, minimalist office of the City Hall's Legal Aid Department, Eleanor Vance meticulously reviewed case files. The sounds of the city, distant traffic, the blare of a taxi horn, were muffled by the soundproofed windows. Eleanor, a sharp and analytical pro bono lawyer, focused on the digital documents on her screen, a mug of lukewarm coffee beside her. Her gaze, however, kept drifting back to a particular photograph on her desk, a faded sepia image of her mother, looking impossibly young and burdened, cradling two infants. Eleanor, and a boy who was her spitting image. This photograph, a recent revelation from a dying aunt, had shattered her perception of her own history. Your mother? She had to make a choice, Eleanor, her aunt had whispered, her voice frail. Times were hard, truly hard. He was given away, for his own good. The words had left a gaping wound in Eleanor's heart, a stark reminder of the poverty that had shaped her mother's impossible decision, a stark contrast to Eleanor's own privileged path. Days later, the verdict reached Marcus like a cold splash of water on his face as he sat on a hard bench in the holding cell. Guilty, the words echoed, not from a judge's lips in a courtroom, but from a weary public defender on a static-filled phone call. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs, the grime of the cell walls closing in. He thought of his fleeting encounter with Eleanor Vance, a lawyer he'd seen in the hallways of the detention center, her gaze distant, yet somehow, hauntingly familiar. He remembered her intelligent eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, a bizarre, unsettling mirror of himself. That brief, unacknowledged connection had left an imprint, a whisper of something lost and now seemingly impossible to reclaim. The news of the conviction, however, ignited a quiet fury in Eleanor. The photograph on her nightstand seemed to accuse her, its silent presence a constant reminder of the life she hadn't known. She downloaded the case file, the glowing screen of her laptop illuminating her face in the dark of her apartment. She reread every police report, every witness statement, every fragment of testimony. The more she delved, the more the inconsistencies screamed at her. The irrefutable eyewitness identification was riddled with doubts. The physical evidence, a single, smudged fingerprint, had mysteriously vanished from the official report after failing to match Marcus. And Officer Miller's testimony, so confidently delivered, now reeked of embellishment, a practiced narrative of bias and deceit. A cold dread settled deep in her stomach. What if the man she'd seen in the detention center, the one condemned to a life behind bars, was not only innocent but her own blood? The thought was a searing brand on her soul. Driven by an insatiable hunger for the truth, Eleanor moved from her office to the gritty streets of Elm Street, her heels clicking purposefully on the uneven pavement. She spoke to shopkeepers, to loiterers on park benches, to anyone who might have seen something. She revisited the corner store, talking to the terrified clerk again, pressing for details that had been conveniently overlooked. She found other witnesses, dismissed by the police as unreliable, whose descriptions of the actual assailant bore no resemblance to Marcus. Her most damning discovery came from a deep dive into Officer Miller's service record. She unearthed a disturbing pattern, a string of questionable arrests, predominantly involving young black men, all under suspiciously similar circumstances. The evidence mounted, a damning indictment of a corrupt officer and a system that had failed to hold him accountable. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying precision, forming a stark, undeniable picture of systemic racial injustice and a life stolen. The final, emotionally charged scene unfolded not in a grand courtroom, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of a prison visitation room. Marcus, escorted from general population for a special visit, entered cautiously, his face a mask of weary resignation, his eyes devoid of the spark Eleanor had glimpsed. Eleanor, her heart pounding against her ribs, laid out the newly uncovered evidence on the small, scratched table. She detailed the glaring inconsistencies in the original investigation, the racial bias that had tainted Officer Miller's actions, the deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. As she spoke, a profound transformation occurred in Marcus's eyes, a slow unfurling from hardened cynicism to a fragile, almost fearful hope. And then, with trembling hands, she slid the faded sepia photograph across the table. Marcus stared at it, his gaze moving from the two infants to Eleanor's face, then back to the image. His brow furrowed in confusion, then widened in disbelief. A sharp, disbelieving gasp escaped his lips. The stale air in the small room thickened with unspoken emotions, a lifetime of separate paths, of shared DNA but disparate destinies, converging in that single, shared moment. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, mirroring his own. "Brother," she whispered, the word a raw, tender revelation, a lifetime of longing and regret contained in a single syllable. The injustice of his wrongful conviction, the unimaginable cruelty of their separation at birth, all of it coalesced into an overwhelming wave of grief and fierce, unyielding determination. She reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "We will fight this, Marcus," she vowed, her voice trembling but resolute. "Not just for you, but for every person wronged by a system that has so cruelly robbed us both of our rightful lives." And in that moment, a bond, forged in sorrow and injustice, began to mend, promising a future of shared purpose and a fight for true justice.